Should you strength train if you're a runner or triathlete? Hey guys, my name's Luke Murfitt and I'm from Evolve Human Performance. We specialise in strength and conditioning for runners and triathletes. Our aim is to decrease their injury rates and increase their performance. So should we strength train? Today we're going to run through the pros and cons of doing strength training for endurance athletes. We're going to start with the pros. First one, decreasing injury risk. And this is the one that is most often talked about because it doesn't really matter who you talk to, a runner or a triathlete or anyone that does some kind of activity in the endurance space. They're probably injured or they've got some kind of form of niggle or they're just returning back from an injury. So this is like a really important one to keep people in the game longer. And I think incorporating some level of strength training for anyone, if you're just starting out or if you're a pro Ironman, can have a really beneficial impact on keeping you in the game longer. And I think even then it's kind of returning back from an injury, it's managing your niggles when they're kind of flaring up and being proactive and loading them up before they escalate, along with some kind of proper load management. I don't know if it's as black or white as people make it out to be. I don't think we can just say this will prevent injuries. I don't think that's the case. There's obviously so many factors to injuries, but I think there's a lot of merit in strength training to decrease injury risk. The second one, increased performance. Now this one's a little bit more straightforward. We get stronger, we improve our power, we improve the functioning of our tendons, the stiffness of our tendons, the overall coordination of how our body is moving through our particular skill, whether it's riding or running or swimming. This one's pretty self-explanatory. We're increasing the robustness of the joint, where even indirectly, I think there's a lot of merit in keeping you in the game longer, therefore letting yourself accumulate more volume, therefore indirectly increasing the performance. There's a lot, I think it becomes more relevant like in the shorter distance stuff where we're talking more about power and speed and those types of things. But I think just keeping you in the game plus keeping you in the game longer, plus that whole potential of increasing your power and your speed and just the capacity of your tendons, I think there's a lot of benefit to incorporating strength training to improve your performance. Third one is going to be increase our efficiency. So this one's a little different and similar to kind of increasing our performance. So again, if we can increase how the body functions, if we can increase the capacity of our tendons, of our joints, everything kind of functioning around the lower and upper body, with some plyometrics, with some heavy loads, we can increase the stiffness of our ankles, of our lower limbs, which can therefore increase the efficiency. So essentially, we're able to get more out for less energy cost. And this one, again, I don't think any of these are kind of black or white, but there's just a lot of potential here. And I think there's a lot of potential, especially for kind of like the lower limb, getting nice and strong there. I guess you could kind of look at it, if you can kind of strive for something a little bit higher up the chain and increase the threshold, what you do below that is going to become more sub-max. So instead of running a 4-minute K at your absolute max, if we can potentially increase the power and speed of the legs and they're capable of running a 340, running 4 minutes is going to become sub-max to you, and hopefully you're a little bit more efficient in actually running that speed because your legs are capable of running a lot quicker. Our fourth one is going to be improved movement, and this is one that doesn't really get as much kind of spotlight as your decrease injury and improved performance does. But for me, this ranks really high in why I really think a lot of endurance athletes should be strength training, because they will always come in and be like, oh, I'm not doing my stretching, my static stretching, I'm not doing my mobility, my foam rolling, and then that's why I'm injured. I think a really good strength and conditioning program can actually cover aspects of your mobility training as well as your strength training, as we kind of increase strength through different ranges of motion, deeper ranges of motion, increase the capacity around tendons, let other things kind of take the load that they're meant to take, and let other things actually relax. And this is what we can actually do if we are following a progressive and really well-structured strength and conditioning program. We can work on imbalances and certain asymmetries, and we can actually, there's not a lot of my athletes that will do kind of like direct mobility. It might be kind of like throughout their workout for sure, but it will be more in kind of like loaded stretching, increasing capacity, doing things that are going to actually create some long-term adaptations as well, and not the short-term stuff that you'll generally see from like your trigger point and sometimes your static stretching. So last but not least is going to be like eliminating niggles and kind of returning back from injury / kind of managing that whole process. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, this is something that a lot of people are familiar with, but they'll kind of get to a point where the injury will become so chronic that they can't actually play their sport, and then that's when they'll start rehabbing that. I think if we can follow a strength and conditioning program that's kind of like updated week to week or kind of in line with how our body's feeling, we can get on top of niggles a lot earlier and manage them a lot better, and hopefully kind of eliminate them altogether, but eliminate them earlier so they don't kind of flare up into these chronic kind of injuries that you see that keep you out of your sport. And I think along those lines comes back from kind of returning from an injury as well. I think there's a bit of a disconnect from like low level rehab to actually like high speed running or high speed riding or swimming or anything like that. And I think a good strength conditioning program that incorporates some plyometrics, some faster work, just to bridge that gap just a little bit more between like, okay, well, I've hurt my ITB kind of lateral knee and I've been doing a static lunge, and now I'm just going to go out and try and run a certain amount of time. I think if we can kind of progressively increase the capacity using some plyometrics, some other kind of loaded exercises, in a way it kind of like, it really helps. So when we get back to our sport, we're actually in a position where we haven't really lost a lot of integrity in that injured site, but across kind of like the rest of the body. So we've been, yes, rehabbing that left knee, but that right knee hasn't seen any kind of plyometric force or any kind of, or anything along those lines in a couple of months, because we've been resting the left knee. And then when we get back, the left knee feels nice and strong, but what happens to the right knee? So sometimes we see a little bit of imbalance where we return from an injury and the other side feels worse than the side that was injured. And I think that's something that we can kind of really do with strength training, is when we are injured, we can still try and make sure everything else is up to scratch by still exposing it to high level stimulus. So then when you do go back to your sport and you're performing at a high level, the rest of the body isn't like, oh, well, what's going on here? So now we'll go into some cons of adding strength training for endurance athletes. And I'm not going to speak about these ones as much as I did about the pros, because obviously I'm very pro strength for endurance sports, but the cons still do exist, but I think they're easily managed. But let's get into them anyway. So the first one, I think the common one I get is kind of like schedule management, like where can I fit it in? I'm pretty time poor. I'm already doing 10 hours worth of endurance training. How am I going to add in another 2 hours or whatever it might be? And I think sometimes we actually do have to sacrifice certain sessions, depending on where you're at in your kind of athletic performance endeavor, what races are coming up, if you're returning back from an injury, all these factors are going to play a certain role. But I think sometimes it's either worth kind of sacrificing the time and just being like, okay, I've just got to do this. I think sometimes we can be really efficient with our strength training and we could get a lot done in probably 40-45 minutes. And I think if we do that 2 times a week, an hour and a half, I don't think it's asking too much. But sometimes we might have to adjust our endurance training just a little bit, just so we can get the benefit of the strength training. And I think in turn, that'll keep you training in your endurance sport a lot longer. And I think you're going to see kind of performance increases and that kind of thing. So I don't really see that one as being an objection. And most people, I think endurance athletes are really good at managing their time, and I've got no doubt that they are training a lot. But I think you can probably find the time if you looked for it, if you really prioritized it as well. Another one I get commonly is like the soreness or extra fatigue associated with strength training. And I think if we do strength training, in a pretty sensible way, we start off nice and conservative and kind of build over time, I don't think this is really a factor at play. Obviously you are adding a little bit more fatigue to the system, but as long as we kind of manage that with your kind of higher volume weeks in line with your other endurance trainings, I don't think this is a deal breaker. I think for sure, on a taper week or a deload or if we're peaking or something like that, we can just bring the volume back down of a strength session. And that's what I often do for my athletes. I'll still kind of do 2 a week, but we'll just drop the volume down, drop the intensity down to still let the body recover. Obviously that's very important. And you are essentially putting more fatigue on the system, but again, I just think it's just so worthwhile. So the other one is kind of not knowing what to do. I think, I don't know if this is really an objection, but it's not too different from just your generic strength training. And there is a lot of information out there on strength training. I think, of course, some of it's not fantastic. Sometimes the health and fitness space can get a little bit dicey, But I would say just kind of go out, you know, hire hopefully a local trainer or something like that, or reach out to me or someone kind of like in this space. It's not too dissimilar from strength training, but there's enough that you probably want someone that is got some level of experience in endurance training and kind of sticking the two together, or some specific experience in strength training for endurance athletes. Because if you're gonna do it, I think it's worth doing it properly, and just adding in, you know, 3 strength sessions on top of an already 10 to 15 hour week could actually do more harm than good. So there's a lot of information out there. I'm going to be putting a lot more information out as well, so hopefully you can follow along that and it'll be just kind of really straightforward and you can manage things yourself. If not, I would just reach out to someone and kind of just straight up ask them, you know, have they got any experience in this area? And the last one, I guess, is a con would be like the injury risk associated with lifting weights. You know, I speak a lot about body weight probably not being a sufficient stimulus for a lot of people, so we do use external load. You know, again, if done conservatively, build over time. I touch wood, haven't had an athlete get injured doing some strength training. You know, there's a lot of other factors in terms of like your recovery and nutrition and getting all of that perfect as well. Not perfect, but you know, striving for a really good level of those things. So I think if you're managing those things, you're staying on top of how your body is feeling, you're not forcing anything, I think that really decreases the risk of injury. So there it is, guys. There's probably more to dive into, and you can probably see that like I'm passionate about this subject, and I could probably talk about it all day. There's probably more from cons, so I'd love to hear kind of, you know, some comments or, you know, some different stuff that you struggle with. And there's probably more for pros. Like each of those kind of 5 or 6 items that I mentioned could probably be kind of branched out 3 or 4 times each, and we could kind of continue to dive into different areas that I think are absolutely essential if you want to maximize your strength for endurance, or if you want to maximize your endurance training. So if you've got any questions, let me know. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, give me a comment, whatever. I would love to hear from you. Hopefully there'll be plenty more of these coming out, so keep a lookout.